I am Ezekiel Drummond. I am 71 years old, and for the past 45 years I have been a husband, a father, and apparently a fool. I came home 4 days early from my trip to surprise my family for Christmas. Instead, I found my wife Cecilia weeping alone on our cold balcony, her face lit by the tree lights. Inside, my son and his in-laws were laughing, toasting with my best whiskey, and finalizing their plan to sell my house and put my wife in a nursing home. They didn't hear me arrive. They also didn't hear the locksmith I called, who arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning to change every lock on the property. The ride from Charlotte Douglas International Airport was quiet. The Charlotte night was cold, clear, and the Christmas lights strung across the city blurred into streaks of color. Something warm settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the cab's heater. 71 years old, and I still felt like a kid on Christmas morning. I loved surprising Cecilia. I'd been in Asia for 3 weeks, but this trip was different from all the ones before it. It was the last one. I had finally made up my mind to retire for real this time. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. If this is your first time, tap that subscribe button so the next story finds its way to you. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're settled in right now. What city? What time of evening? Is it there? Drop it in the comments. I always love knowing who's listening alongside me. Now, a brief word. Some elements of this story have been shaped for the purposes of audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real persons or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it, and that part is very real. 40 years as a mechanical engineer, and I was finally done. I wanted to tell Cecilia in person to watch her eyes light up with all the plans we'd talked about for so long. We were going to see the world together, not on my company's dime, but on our own terms. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the familiar cobblestone path leading to our Dilworth home. This house was our whole life. We'd bought it back in the 70s when the neighborhood was the last place anyone wanted to be. We'd poured 45 years of sweat and savings into these walls. We'd raised our son Cortez here. But as I came up toward the door, something felt off. The house was blazing with light and music was spilling out, not Cecilia's quiet jazz, but something loud and modern. I thought maybe Cortez and Renee had brought the grandkids by. Then I remembered we didn't have any grandkids yet. I still had my key. I eased it into the lock, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. The hallway was dark. The living room beyond it glowed like a Christmas display. And that's when I heard it. Not the music, something underneath the music. Someone was crying. It was a muffled, heartbroken sob, the kind that's fighting to stay quiet. I moved carefully down the hall. I'm a big man, 6'2", but I learned decades ago how to move without being heard, how to watch before I act. The sound was drawing me toward the sliding glass door and the balcony beyond it. I looked through the gap in the curtains, and my heart just broke in two. It was Cecilia. She was standing out in the freezing December air in nothing but her thin house robe, arms wrapped tight around herself, shaking. Tears ran down her face as she stared at the single string of Christmas lights Cortez had strung on the old oak in the yard. She looked small, defeated. Every part of me wanted to go to her, pull her close to man to know who had done this. But then my eyes moved to the living room, and everything inside me went still. Cortez was settled into my leather armchair, my armchair cradling a heavy crystal tumbler of my best whiskey, the 18-year-old single malt I was saving for our anniversary. He was laughing the way I hadn't heard him laugh in years. Across from him sat Renee, his wife, and her parents Gerald and Paulette. They were dressed for a celebration. Renee wore a fitted emerald dress, her dark hair swept back perfectly. She was carrying a new designer watch, the kind I knew cost thousands of dollars. Her father, Gerald, was smoking one of my cigars, out of my humidor, in my house, while my wife stood shaking in the cold not 10 feet away. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I pressed myself into the shadow of the hallway, and I listened. "I'm telling you, Gerald," Renee said, her voice cutting clean through the music. "It's a done deal. Cortez finally sees things my way. We have to be serious about this." Gerald swirled his whiskey with that look of arrogance I'd despised from the first day I met him. "He'd better. This property, the land under it, this is prime Dilworth real estate. We're not talking about a modest retirement account. We're talking about generational wealth." "What about your mother?" Paulette, Renee's mother, asked Cortez. Her voice was flat as a blade. She seemed resistant the last time we spoke. Cortez waved her off, that laugh again. "Oh, don't worry about her. She'll do whatever I tell her. She always has. She's too weak to push back." My blood went cold. Weak. He called Cecilia weak. The woman who spent 30 years teaching in Charlotte's toughest schools. The woman who raised that boy while I was across the world working. The woman who had held this entire family together with her bare hands. Renee leaned forward. "She's just lonely and depressed, Cortez. Honestly, a nursing home would be the best thing for her. She'd have people her own age around her. We'll find a good one." "Exactly," Paulette agreed. "We've already toured a lovely facility, Sunrise Meadows. It's top-notch. We just need her signature on the power of attorney. Once that's done, we sell the house. Cortez takes his half, invests it with Gerald, and everyone comes out ahead." His half. They were already carving up what was mine. Cortez shifted in the chair. He didn't look guilty, he looked nervous. "Are you sure she'll sign?" "She will," Renee said, with a cold certainty I had never heard from her before. She reached over and laid her hand on her stomach. "I told her this morning that I'm pregnant, and I told her that if she wants to be part of her grandchild's life, she needs to stop being selfish and do what's best for the family. She'll sign before New Year's. She's been desperate for a grandchild." The bile rose in my throat. A fake pregnancy. A threat dressed up as good news. They were using a child that didn't exist to blackmail my wife, who was still on that balcony shaking so hard I could see it from across the room. I couldn't breathe. I'd heard enough. I backed out of the hallway and through the front door. I didn't slam it. I eased it shut so carefully the latch made no sound at all. I climbed back into the cab, which was still idling at the curb. The driver caught my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost." "No," I said. My own voice was unrecognizable to me. "Take me to the Kimpton Tryon Park Hotel, the one in Uptown." As the cab rolled away, I kept my eyes on the house. My house. They thought I was a retired, oblivious old man. They thought Cecilia was weak. They believed they had already won. I took out my phone. I didn't call Cortez. I didn't call Cecilia. I called my personal security manager. "Troy, it's Ezekiel. I need a bonded locksmith at 412 Dilworth Road at 6 a.m. sharp. Change every lock on the property. Digital deadbolts, all of it. No exceptions." He didn't ask a single question. "Yes, Mr. Drummond, it's done." Then I made a second call, a number I could dial from memory. "Clarence, it's Ezekiel Drummond. I know it's late. Wake up. We have a serious problem, and I need you at my house tomorrow at 8 a.m. I was out of the Kimpton Tryon Park Hotel before sunrise. The locksmith was professional, quick, and completely silent. He finished at 6:15 a.m., just as the first pale lights crept across the Charlotte skyline. I paid him in cash and stepped back into my own home. The place felt foreign. The air hung heavy with stale cigar smoke and the sharp edge of Renee's perfume. I left the lights off. I walked into the dark living room, the scene of everything I'd witnessed, and lowered myself into my leather armchair, the same one my son had been laughing in just hours before. And I waited. 45 minutes of silence. Then I heard the old floorboards creak upstairs, a toilet flush. And at 7 a.m. on the dot, her footsteps slow heavy on the stairs. Cecilia walked into the kitchen with her back to me, moving straight to the coffee pot. Her hands were trembling so badly she spilled the dark grounds across the white counter. She didn't clean it up. She just leaned there with her head bowed and her shoulders caved in. "Ezekiel," she whispered to no one. I said nothing. I watched. She turned around slowly. When she found me sitting there in the shadows, she didn't scream. She made a small, broken sound, a sharp gasp, and her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with a kind of terror I had never seen on her face in 45 years of marriage. "Ezekiel! Oh my God!" She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. "When did you get home? Why are you sitting in the dark? You scared me to death." "I got home last night," I said. My voice was steady, cold, barely my own. "I scared you? That's interesting because I was scared too. Cecilia, I was scared when I found my wife weeping on the balcony while my son sat inside, raising a glass to selling my house. Every drop of color left her face. She didn't reach for a denial. She didn't try to construct a lie. Whatever had been holding her upright on that balcony, whatever she'd been drawing on for months, it gave way all at once. She went down right there on the kitchen floor beside the island and she wept. Not the hushed, contained grief from the night before. This was something deeper, a raw, heaving, soul-shaking cry that rose up from a place of long-buried shame. "I didn't know what to do." She choked out her words, fracturing between sobs. I'm so sorry, Ezekiel. I'm so sorry. I didn't move from the chair. I didn't go to her. I couldn't. Tell me everything, I said, from the beginning. And she did. It all came pouring out 6 months of manipulation and quiet terror spilling onto the kitchen floor between us. It all began right after Cortez landed that promotion at Gerald's company. A promotion I now understood was never anything more than bait in a trap. It started with suggestions. Renee the snake would come around for dinner. "Oh, Cecilia," she'd say, "this house is just so big for 2 people now. Aren't you worried about those stairs? All this upkeep, doesn't it wear you out?" Then Gerald and Paulette inserted themselves. They started holding forth about their own brilliant retirement strategy, throwing around phrases like liquidating assets and smart investments. Gerald's company. Cecilia whispered, her voice barely holding together. They kept saying Gerald's company was the future, Whitfield Innovations. They said if we just sold the house, just this one asset, Gerald could turn the money around. He promised he could double it within a year. He said it would be enough to care for us and set Cortez and Renee up for life. I just stared at her, my wife, a retired school teacher with a master's degree taken in by a cheap con, pitched to her by her own son. I told them no. She insisted, crying harder now. For months I told them no. I told them this house was our home. This is where we raised Cortez. This is where your memory lives. She broke down further. And Cortez? Where was he in all of this? Cecilia's face crumpled. He sided with them, Ezekiel. At first he stayed quiet, but for the last 2 months he's been the one driving it hardest. He said I was being selfish. He said I was hoarding wealth. He said we owed it to him for all the humble years he suffered through growing up. Humble. We gave that boy everything. Private school, a car the day he turned 16. We covered his entire college education at Wake Forest. We put down the down payment on his first condo, and he had the nerve to call it modest. They want to put us in a nursing home, Ezekiel. She said, her voice dropping to almost nothing. They call it assisted living, but it's a home. She told me they'd shown her a brochure, Sunrise Meadows. Renee had said it was perfect, that she'd make new friends there. The room felt dense with her shame. And last night, I said, my voice like gravel. Last night wasn't just talk, was it? She shook her head still, unable to meet my eyes. They gave me an ultimatum. They said they were tired of waiting. They wanted me to sign the listing agreement today before you got back. And the threat I asked, though I already knew. Cecilia finally looked up at me, her eyes carrying a pain that ran deeper than just betrayal. The baby. Well, what baby? Renee, she sobbed. She told me last night she's pregnant. She said if I didn't sign the papers by New Year's, if I didn't stop making things difficult, they would move away. And they would make sure I never saw my grandchild. Not ever. The lie. The final filthy lie. Weaponizing a child that didn't even exist to rob us blind. I got to my feet. The cold fury that had gripped me in the cab the night before had hardened overnight into something else entirely dense and heavy, like a bar of steel. I looked at my wife folded on the floor. I still loved her, but the strong woman I had built a life with had been ground down, worn thin. "Get up, Cecilia," I said. "What?" She sniffled. "Get up, go upstairs, shower, put on your best clothes. It's time to stop crying." As if on cue at exactly 8 a.m., a loud and impatient pounding shook the front door. Not a knock, a pounding. "Mom," I heard Cortez shout from the other side of the door. "Open up! What the hell, my key won't work." Then Renee's voice sharp and irritated. "She probably threw the deadbolt. I told you she was getting paranoid." Cecilia turned to me, her eyes wide with panic. "What do we do? Ezekiel, what are we going to do?" I walked past her. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. All 4 of them stood on the porch. Cortez, Renee Giral, and Paulette bundled in their expensive coats, faces set with annoyance and entitlement. Cecilia caught my arm. "Ezekiel, please don't." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Go get dressed," I said. "I'll handle this." I drew a slow breath. I unlocked the new deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. All 4 of them stared at me. Their faces were a perfect, priceless portrait of total shock. "Dad," Cortez gasped. You're home early." I glanced at the key still hanging from his hand, the key that no longer opened anything. "Your key doesn't work," I said, my voice carrying out into the cold morning air. "Because this is no longer your house to enter." The silence that fell was thick and heavy. Cortez's mouth opened and shut without producing a sound, like a fish pulled onto a dock. Gerald, the man who had been drawing from my humidor just hours before, went a sickly shade of pale. Paulette clutched the expensive pearls at her throat, eyes wide, but it was Renee who pulled herself together first. She was a fighter. I had to grant her that. She smoothed the shock right off her face and assembled a bright, brittle smile. "Dad!" she exclaimed, pitching her voice loud enough for the neighbors to catch. "Oh my goodness, you're home! What a wonderful surprise! We were just so worried about Mom." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. "Yes." She pressed on, stepping forward as though she intended to embrace me. I raised one hand, and she halted, her arm stuck awkwardly in the air. "We came by to take you both out for a lovely Christmas breakfast. We have such wonderful plans to share for the future, to make sure you're both looked after and safe." "A plan," I said, flat. "The plan you were all discussing last night around midnight. The one involving selling my house and placing my wife in a nursing home." Renee's smile didn't just fade, it broke apart. Cortez winced as if he'd taken a blow. I don't know what you're referring to," she stammered, eyes darting between me and her parents. "We were just exploring options." "Options," I repeated, like threatening Cecilia with a fake pregnancy if she refused to sign the papers. Cortez flinched hard. Renee's face moved through pale and landed on a deep, blotchy red. "How dare you! How dare you eavesdrop on a private—" She didn't finish. A low rumble cut her off. A black Cadillac Escalade, the kind you don't see rolling down Dilworth Road every day, glided silently to the curb behind them. It was long, dark, and radiated the kind of wealth that Gerald and Paulette only ever performed. My wealth. The rear door swung open, and a man stepped out. He was in his 50s, tall, precise, and dressed in an immaculately tailored dark pinstriped suit. He carried a substantial leather briefcase. This was Clarence Oduya, my attorney, my confidant, the man who had managed my real financial affairs for the past 20 years. The four of them turned to look. Their faces went confused. This man, this vehicle, none of it fit the story they'd built in their heads about a retired, clueless old engineer with nothing left to protect. Clarence walked past them as though they were ornamental shrubbery, stepped up onto the porch and addressed me directly. "Mr. Drummond, Mrs. Drummond." He said, his voice deep and measured. He nodded first to me, then to Cecilia, who had appeared behind me in the doorway, wearing her best blue dress, her expression uncertain. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice." He opened his briefcase, clicked his pen, and produced a folder. "This is the updated deed for the foundation, ready for your signature." Cecilia looked at me, bewildered. "Foundation Ezekiel, what?" And I gave her hand a gentle pat. "We'll talk about it later, dear. Business first." Then Clarence turned the full weight of his attention to the four people still planted on my front walkway. He regarded them not as family members, but as a minor obstruction to be dealt with. He drew 2 thick formal envelopes from his briefcase. "Are you Cortez Drummond?" he asked. Cortez nodded, his throat moving, but no words forming. Clarence extended the first envelope. "You have been served." He turned. "And you are Renee Whitfield? Doast." Renee flinched. "Yes, what is this? What is happening?" He held out the second envelope. "You have also been served." "Served?" Cortez erupted, his voice finally breaking through. He tore the envelope open. "Served with what I don't understand." "That," Clarence said, his tone cutting cleanly through the crisp morning air, "is a temporary restraining order filed on behalf of my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Drummond. It legally prohibits you, your wife, and her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield." He paused and let his eyes pass over them with measured disdain. "From contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of this property." "What?" Renee shrieked, her voice cracking. "On what grounds we are family?" "On the grounds," Clarence said, reading calmly from the document, "of elder harassment conspiracy to commit fraud and emotional extortion. My clients hold documented evidence and recorded material demonstrating a systematic campaign of intimidation designed to illegally seize their assets. Extortion." The word hung in the air. Gerald and Paulette looked horrified, not because of the accusation itself, but because they had been named out loud on a public street. Renee, though, recovered faster than any of them. The fear drained from her face, and what replaced it was a cold, reptilian fury. "This is ridiculous," she screamed, crumpling the legal papers in her fist. "This is insane. We are the victims here." She leveled a shaking finger at me. He's the one threatening us. He's delusional. He's been in Asia for 3 weeks. He's probably still jet-lagged. He doesn't even know what he's saying. She swung toward her parents and then back at us, her voice climbing into something hysterical. A performance staged for the entire neighborhood. We were trying to help them. We were trying to protect them from their own decisions. He's the one who isn't well. She lunged toward the edge of the porch, eyes blazing with a cornered, desperate rage. You want to talk about harassment? What about the harassment of 2 elderly people who can no longer manage on their own? Then she turned her venom on Cecilia, who pulled back behind me. And just look at her. She's been crying for 6 months. She's depressed. She's paranoid. She told me just last week she thought she heard an intruder in the house. She's losing her mind. Cecilia looked at me, stricken. I thought I did. Renee smiled. It was a cruel, triumphant smile. She turned back to Clarence. You can't serve us, counselor. We are the only family they have. This isn't extortion. This is a family intervention. She took a step back, grabbed Cortez's arm, and her voice became dangerously calm, more frightening somehow than all the yelling. In fact, thank you for this. You've just proved our point. You've proved that my father-in-law is erratic, paranoid, and a clear danger to himself and others. She looked past me into my own house as though she already held the deed. You think you're smart, Dad? You think you've won. We're not trying to steal your assets. We're trying to manage them because neither of you, she said, stabbing a perfectly manicured finger first at me, then at my wife, are mentally competent to do it yourselves. Renee's accusation settled over everything, thick and poisonous, mentally competent. Those words were a declaration of war. Before I could respond, Gerald stepped forward. He physically positioned himself in front of his daughter, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, a gesture that said, "Let the men handle this now." He straightened his already immaculate suit jacket. He was every inch the picture of suburban success, the kind of man who measures his worth by the car he drives and the club he belongs to. Ezekiel, he said, using my first name with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Let's all just take a breath. My daughter is emotional. This has been a stressful morning. We clearly got off on the wrong foot. He was projecting calm, reasonable authority, the adult in the room. Look, he said, gesturing vaguely at the legal papers Clarence was holding. Let's set aside all this drama. This isn't about lawyers and restraining orders. This is about family, and more importantly, it's about common sense. I just stared at him. Clarence beside me was perfectly still. You've done a wonderful job with this house. Gerald continued, his tone thick with condescension. A real fixer-upper in its day, and you've timed it perfectly. The market in Dilworth is white hot. This property, he gestured toward my home, is sitting on a gold mine. A gold mine, Ezekiel. He leaned in, lowering his voice like he was sharing a confidence. But a gold mine that just sits there is worthless. It's dead money. It's brick and wood. It's not working for you. You're 71. Cecilia is what, 69. You two don't need all this space. You don't need the maintenance, the taxes, the stairs. What you need is security, liquidity. He smiled, pleased with his financial vocabulary. That's all we were saying. We want to help you realize the value of this asset. We want to help you transition. Transition, I repeated. The word felt dirty. Exactly. Sell the house, take the proceeds, and let me put them to work. Let me put them into Whitfield Innovations. He registered the blank look on my face and chuckled. My company, we're on the cutting edge. New battery technology. It's the next Tesla, Ezekiel, the next Apple. We're doing things nobody else is doing. I had a role to play. The role they had written for me, the confused, simple-minded old man. I let a look of cautious curiosity cross my face and tilted my head slightly. Whitfield Innovations. That does sound familiar. I think I came across something about it in the business section. Gerald's chest swelled. He was hooked. Of course you have. We're the talk of the financial world. We're in the middle of our Series C funding. The projections are frankly astronomical. I stroked my chin. Battery technology, you say? That's complex territory. Is it stable? I mean, I'm just an old engineer, but that sounds like it carries some risk. Gerald laughed a loud, booming laugh that grated on every nerve I had. Risk. That's the difference between us, Ezekiel. You see risk, I see opportunity. You have to spend money to make money. We're talking about a patented lithium polymer breakthrough that will change everything. Electric vehicles home, energy military applications. This isn't a risk. It's a sure thing. Tell me more, I said, letting false admiration fill my voice. It sounds very promising. What kind of returns are you projecting? Gerald was in his element now, the big man explaining the world to someone he believed couldn't follow. We're projecting a 500% return within 18 months, he said, pulling the number straight out of thin air. 500%. You give me the $500,000 from this house, and I turn it into $2.5 million. Cortez is set for life. You and Cecilia are set for life. Everyone wins. 500%, I repeated slowly. That's incredible, truly. He nodded, smiling wide. I paused. I let the silence stretch for a long moment. That's odd, I said. Gerald's smile flickered. What's odd? Well, I said, it's just that I was looking at the Q4 financial reports for Whitfield Innovations this morning on my flight home. The color drained visibly from Gerald's face. His smile vanished. Renee and Cortez, who had been watching with growing confidence, went rigid. What reports? Gerald stammered. What are you talking about? The reports filed with your creditors, I said. The numbers in those documents tell a very different story. They don't project a 500% gain. They project, let me make sure I have this right, yes, a $14 million operational deficit and an immediate intent to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within the next 30 days. Gerald looked as though I'd driven a fist into his gut. He'd gone pale. His hands were trembling. That's slander, he sputtered. Those are private documents. How did you get those? I have them because they were sent to all major creditors, I said. Which brings me to my next point. I turned to my attorney. Mr. Oduya, what's the name of the fund that currently holds the largest unsecured debt position in Whitfield Innovations? Clarence glanced at his papers. That would be the Apex Technology Fund, Mr. Drummond. They hold $22 million of his defaulted bonds. Gerald looked as though he might be sick right there on my walkway. Apex Technology Fund, I said, holding Gerald's gaze. That's also mine. It's an investment I built 40 years ago when I sold a patent on a pressure valve system I designed. I let him connect the dots. I watched the realization move across his face like a slow-wave horror pooling in his eyes. I leaned in close enough that only he, Renee, and Cortez could hear. I didn't just found Apex, Gerald. I am Apex. I own the whole fund, which means, as of this morning, I own you. Cortez was the first to find his voice. It came out as a hoarse whisper, barely audible. Dad, what are you talking about? What is Apex? You're an engineer. You're retired. He looked around, eyes wide and frantic, searching for someone to anchor him to the reality he'd always known. He's confused, right, Renee? He's jet-lagged. He's not making sense. Renee was silent. The arrogant fire that had been blazing in her eyes had gone out. What replaced it was something narrow and calculating. She was looking at me, truly seeing me for the first time. She was smart enough to know I wasn't bluffing. You're joking, Cortez pleaded, his voice rising, cracking. This has to be a joke, a sick, cruel joke. You can't be. His voice fell away. He searched my face for the simple retired father he'd always known, the man he had dismissed, the man he had planned to discard. He didn't find him. You're a mechanical engineer, he said one last time, his voice small and hollow. You worked at the plant. We live modestly. I said, my voice steady. I was a mechanical engineer, and I was a very good one. I looked past him, past the manicured lawn, back to a moment 40 years ago. When I was a young man at NC State, I designed something small, a pressure-actuated relief valve system for high-temperature fluid dynamics. It wasn't the kind of thing that turns heads. You could hold it in your hand and have no idea what you were looking at. But what it did was revolutionary. I glanced at Gerald, who was now sweating visibly through his expensive shirt. That valve became the industry standard in offshore drilling, then in chemical plants, then in nuclear reactors. I turned back to my son. I sold that pot in Cortez, sold it in 1982 for what felt like all the money in the world. But I didn't want that money to define me, and I did not want it to define you. I let that settle. The only sound was a distant siren. I'd seen what unearned wealth does to a man. I watched it destroy my own family. Saw my uncle drink himself to death after an inheritance. I swore that would never happen to my son. So, I took that money and handed it to a college friend, the sharpest financial mind I have ever known. I told him to grow it and to do it quietly. He did. His name is Clarence Oduya. Cortez's eyes moved to my attorney, who stood perfectly still, impassive as stone. Clarence founded the Apex Technology Fund. And while I went to work at the plant every single day for 40 years, while your mother stood at the front of a classroom, while we lived in this house and clipped coupons, that fund grew. It grew from millions to tens of millions. Then the tech boom hit, and it grew into 9 figures. 9 figures, Renee whispered. It was barely a sound at all, the sound of a dream caving in. Yes, I lived modestly because I wanted you to understand the value of $1. I wanted you to know how to work, how to sweat, how to build something with your own hands. I wanted you to be a man Cortez, not just a rich man's son. I looked at him, and the sadness I felt had no bottom. I failed. I gave you everything: the education, the down payment on your first condo, every opportunity I could clear a path to, but I never gave you character. I protected you so thoroughly that I left you soft. I made you easy prey for people like this. I gestured toward Gerald and Paulette. I wanted you to understand hard work. Instead, you came to resent me for it. You felt you were enduring some modest life while you waited for me to die so you could take this house. This house, which I can tell you, is barely a rounding error in my portfolio. My son had nothing to say. He stared at the ground. I turned my attention back to the real criminal. So you see, Gerald, I said, stepping closer to him. I don't just own your debt. I am the man you have been lying to for the last 3 quarters. Gerald was shaking now, visibly uncontrollably. It was a bridge loan. The market shifted. I can explain. Shut up, I said, dropping my voice. Just shut up. You didn't just miss projections, Gerald. You committed fraud. You submitted falsified reports to my fund. You claimed assets you don't possess. You lied about your burn rate. That's not just poor business judgment. That's a federal crime. I looked to Clarence, who had been waiting with quiet patience for his cue. Mr. Oduya, you are a witness to this conversation. You heard Mr. Gerald's partner, his own daughter, openly admit to a conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. You have the financial reports I forwarded to you. Clarence gave a single grave nod. I do, Mr. Drummond. Then I want you to make 2 calls. The first is to the board of Apex. Tell them I am calling in the full $22 million loan, effective immediately. I want his company liquidated by the end of the fiscal year. And the second call? Clarence asked. The second call, I said, holding Gerald's eyes, is to the district attorney. Tell them I have a file on Whitfield Innovations that establishes securities fraud. I want him prosecuted. That was when the screaming started. Not Renee this time, Paulette. She let out a piercing shriek, pure, undiluted terror. No, Gerald, he can't do this. He can't. She grabbed her husband's arm, but he was useless to her. He just stood there, mouth slack, eyes gone vacant. The man who had been holding court at his country club 5 minutes ago had simply ceased to exist. Paulette's eyes rolled back, and she crumpled onto the brick walkway in a dead faint. Mom, Renee screamed, dropping beside her. Gerald didn't move. He just stared at me, his whole life in ruins around him. And Cortez, my son, stood perfectly frozen. He hadn't moved an inch. He was caught between the family he had betrayed and the family he had tried to buy his way into watching both of them burn to the ground at the same time. Dad, stop. Please stop. I turned. Cortez stumbled forward and dropped to his knees on the grass right in front of me. He grabbed the fabric of my pants, his face twisted with raw, desperate terror. Dad, you can't, he sobbed. Please don't call the DA. Don't liquidate his company. You'll destroy them. You'll destroy Renee. You'll destroy me. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot tears and sweat running together on his face. This is my life, Dad. My family. You'll ruin everything. I'll lose my job. I'll have nothing. I looked down at my son, my 40-year-old son, kneeling on the lawn, begging me to spare the very people who had conspired to put his mother in a home. I felt nothing, not anger, not pity, just a cold, hollow emptiness. You'll have nothing, I said, my voice low and hard. That's what you're worried about, your job and them. You stood in my living room last night, Cortez, while your wife and her parents laughed about putting Cecilia in a nursing home. You heard every word. You agreed with them. I crouched slightly, forcing him to look at me. Where were you when your mother was out on that balcony weeping in the cold? Where were you when she was so frightened of all of you that she couldn't sleep? Where was this passion for your family then? You made your choice, son. You chose them. You chose their lies over your own blood. I didn't know, he pleaded. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know he was broke. He knew. A new voice cut through everything. Renee. She had pulled herself to her feet, leaving Paulette sobbing on the ground. Her face was pale, her expensive dress smudged with dirt, and her eyes held a venom so concentrated it was frightening. She wasn't just beaten. She was cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing there is. "He's lying!" she screamed at me. "Cortez knew. He knew everything." Renee, shut up. Cortez scrambled upright. "No." She turned on him with everything she had left. "I will not shut up. I am not going down for this alone." She swung back and pointed her trembling finger at me. "It was his idea. He was the one always complaining. He was the one ashamed of you. He was the one who couldn't stand it." She kept going, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "He was the one who told me his dad is just a stubborn old man sitting on a fortune, too stubborn and too stupid to use it. He was embarrassed to bring me here. He hated living in that tiny condo while his father walked around playing the humble retired fool." She turned to me, then tears of pure rage pouring down her face. You selfish old man, you had 9 figures, all of that, and you let me marry him." She jabbed a finger at Cortez. "You let me marry a failure? You let me believe this house was the grand prize. I wouldn't have given him a second look if I'd known he was just a what, Renee?" Cortez whispered, his face the color of ash. "A disappointment," she shrieked. "A weak, pathetic man who couldn't even stand up to his own parents. I told him to be tough. I told him to take what was ours. I told him his mother was weak and would sign anything if he pushed hard enough. I had to marry him just to have a shot at something better. Just to get this house." The admission was so naked, so stripped of all pretense that even Clarence took a half step back. Cortez just stared at her. The approaching sirens were growing louder, but he didn't seem to hear them. He looked at his wife, the woman he had chosen over his own mother, as if he was seeing her for the very first time. "What?" he whispered. "You married me for this house." Cortez breathed the words like a man surfacing from deep water. "That's all it was. What you thought my father was sitting on." Renee met his gaze, and whatever careful performance she had maintained all this time simply collapsed. The sophistication, the poise gone. What remained was something ugly, something desperate and feral. "Yes." The word didn't come out, it tore out of her. "That's exactly right. This house, this land, this neighborhood. Did you honestly believe it was something else, that it was you?" She put both hands on his chest and pushed. "Your dead-end job, your tiresome little anecdotes. I sat through all of it. Your mother and those sad bargain store clothes and that vacant look she always carried, I sat through her too. Year after year of this performance. The humble house, the modest life, pretending there was nothing here because my parents kept telling me to hold on. He's an old man, Renee. That's what they'd say. He won't be around forever. Protect the investment. Get the house." Those red-rimmed, frantic eyes swung over to me. "You think I chose to drag myself through holiday after holiday in this dreary place, listening to your wife reminisce I was owed more than this? We were owed more. My parents gave up everything, and you were sitting on a fortune letting us go without." She swung her finger toward Cortez. "He was nothing but a means to an end, a skeleton key, weak and easy to turn. And I had it. I was right there. And then you—" the finger moved back. "You blew it up." Her voice broke apart, and the weeping that followed wasn't grief. It was a wail of rage. "Gerald's company means nothing to me. That phantom fund of yours means nothing. I came here for this house. This is the payment I earned. This is what I'm owed for every year I buried beside your useless son." I kept still. My voice stayed down. My feet didn't move from that porch. What I did was laugh, not the kind of laugh that holds any warmth. This was hollow, dry, merciless. A sound that sliced right through her fury and stopped it cold. Stopped her. Stopped every person on that lawn. The wail of a siren was closing in from somewhere down the block, but right then the only thing anyone could hear was that laugh hanging in the morning air. Renee stood there, her breath coming hard, her hair unraveling around her face. "What's so funny to you? What is it, old man?" I pressed one finger to the corner of my eye and caught the single cold tear sitting there. "You are," I told her. "That's what's funny. Every scheme, every lie, every year you say you threw away." Behind me stood that handsome 2-story brick house. I let my hand sweep toward it. "All of it for this. one step forward. Renee, I've just finished explaining to you that I control a 9-figure investment fund, and you are standing here telling me that this property, this lot on Dilworth Road, is the prize you were after. That this is what I value most. Slow shake of the head. You're a fool. Her face went ugly. What do you mean the land has to be worth millions on its own? It's a rounding error, that's all it is. I said nothing more to her. Instead, I turned slightly toward my attorney, who had stood through the entire spectacle with the motionless calm of a man who has already won. Mr. Oduya, my voice had settled back to something like quiet. File B, if you would. Oduya gave one short nod. He reached into that pristine leather briefcase past the restraining orders, past the fraud documentation, and drew out a thin manila folder. Rather than offer it across, he opened it where he stood. File B. Oduya, said his voice carrying to every corner of the lawn. What you're looking at is a certified copy of a fully executed and recorded quit-claim deed dated June 12th of this year, 6 months ago. He lifted the front page for the room to see. Effective that date, he went on, Mr. Ezekiel Drummond and Mrs. Cecilia Drummond, permanently and without reservation, conveyed their complete ownership of the property at 412 Dilworth Road. Cortez's head came up. The confusion on his face was giving way to something pitiful, a fragile grasping hope. Conveyed to who, Dad, is it me? Tell me it's in my name. Renee's eyes hadn't left the page. She was moving through every line, hunting. Who? She demanded, her voice dropping to a hiss. Not you, Mr. Drummond. Oduya said, no color in his voice whatsoever. Neither of you. He let a beat pass, let it settle. The entirety of the property was conveyed to a non-profit charitable organization. This house passed out of your family's hands. That happened 6 months ago. The sound Renee made next had no name. A strangled, agonizing wail from somewhere she didn't know she had. No, this is a lie. That can't be legal. You can't just, we'll go to court. We'll fight every bit of this. You don't just hand away someone's inheritance. Gerald, who had gone rigid and silent, finally broke. A hoarse whisper was all he could manage. Who did you sell it to? I took him in this man who had built his little scheme on the wreckage of my household. I took in Renee, half collapsed against Cortez, shaking with sobs. I took in my son, who had gone somewhere far behind his own eyes. And last, I took in Cecilia, my wife. Her eyes were wide and fixed on me. The terror that had lived there for months, it was draining away. Something else was rising in its place. Recognition. The quiet return of something I had not seen in her face for a long time. I didn't sell it, Gerald, I said. The first cruiser swung around the corner, its red and blue strobes painting the front of the house. I told you from the beginning. I gave it away. To who? Renee's voice cracked into a shriek. I made a donation, I said simply. Every square foot of this property and everything on it now belongs to the Cecilia Drummond Foundation for Victims of Domestic and Emotional Abuse. I held my wife's gaze. I put her name on it, Cortez, your mother's name, the woman every one of you worked to grind down. It was the police light sweeping across Gerald's face that finally shattered the quiet. 2 officers came across the lawn, angled wide around Renee, and went straight for her father. Oduya didn't hesitate for half a second. He moved to intercept them, voice raised so the officers and every neighbor pressing closer could take it in. And I want it on record, Mrs. Drummond, he said, pivoting toward Renee, who was still gasping for air, that your statements here this morning openly confessing to an extended conspiracy to defraud your mother-in-law and to engineering her commitment as mentally unfit for the purpose of financial seizure have been heard and documented. What I didn't confess to anything, she managed, eyes darting toward the uniforms. You spoke freely, Oduya replied. In front of multiple witnesses, that's a confession. He glanced back at me. Mrs. Drummond's admissions shift this matter considerably. The emotional distress claim is no longer a negotiating posture. It's a guaranteed judgment. He turned back. Cortez had the look of a man turned to marble. On behalf of Mrs. Cecilia Drummond, we are filing a civil action this afternoon. $5 million. Damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to commit fraud and elder harassment. An injunction freezing all assets belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Cortez Drummond will accompany that filing. $5 million. You could feel it land. Renee lurched backward, palm pressed flat to her sternum. You can't, a breath. That's not possible. No, I said almost gently. It isn't. That's precisely why it works. The first officer had come up beside Gerald, who was still mouthing the words Apex Fund to himself, as though they might rearrange into something he could survive. Sir, a hand came down on his arm. Gerald's whole body recoiled. Mr. Gerald Whitfield? Yes, why? He was pulling back, trying to reassemble the bearing of a man in charge. You are under arrest, the officer said. No drama in it, snapping the cuffs open. Arrest! Paulette's voice was the one that broke first. She'd gotten herself upright on the walkway and was pushing forward. Arrest him for what? Securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement from the Whitfield Innovations Pension Fund. The second officer answered flat and unhurried. An anonymous tip came in immediately, backed up by a full evidentiary package out of the district attorney's office, submitted by the Apex Technology Fund. Oduya. He hadn't placed one call. He had handed them the complete file, every document. The man was a predator. No, Paulette lunged at the officer's arm as the cuffs went on Gerald's wrists. Let him go. None of this is real. It's him. And she jabbed that manicured finger in my direction. He orchestrated every bit of this. He's the one you want. He set a trap. The officers didn't even look at her. The cuff clicked shut. They turned. Ma'am, step forward, please. Your name appears on the fraudulent loan documents as co-signer. Gerald! Paulette wailed as they moved her hands behind her back. Gerald, don't let them do this. Her words dissolved into the rights being read as they walked the two of them toward the waiting car. Renee didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood and watched. The scaffolding that had held up her entire existence, her parents, their manufactured wealth, their standing, was being walked across the lawn in handcuffs. There was nothing left. No house, no inheritance, nothing. And she had just watched her parents get walked to a police cruiser. She turned slowly. The shock had drained from her eyes, replaced by something colder, a flat reptilian hatred. She looked at Cortez. You, she breathed. Renee Cortez started, both hands lifted in a feeble gesture of surrender. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea he had. You knew. The word came out like venom. You didn't know he was wealthy, but you knew he was immovable. You knew how stubborn he was. You told me your mother was fragile. You told me she'd collapse under pressure. You lied to me. I didn't lie. I just thought, you thought nothing. She flew at him, fists clenched. You are weak. You have always been weak. You couldn't hold your own ground against your parents, not once. You couldn't build us any kind of future. You stood there and let all of this happen. My future, Cortez erupted back, all the buried confusion and resentment finally breaking the surface. My mother? You mean the woman you threatened, the woman you called fragile? She is fragile, and so are you. The slap landed like a gunshot. Renee's hand caught Cortez across the face with enough force that his head whipped sideways. The neighbors still out on the street drew a collective breath. Cortez brought his palm slowly to his burning cheek. He said nothing. He only looked at her. Coward! She spat the word, her chest heaving. You surrendered everything. The house, the money. Me. You are a coward, Cortez Drummond. You are nothing. You are exactly like them. She threw a contemptuous gesture toward me and Cecilia. Nothing but a feeble, pathetic failure. Cortez didn't answer. He stood motionless, cheek-blazing eyes completely hollow. He had just seen his entire existence go up in smoke. His wife despised him. His in-laws were in handcuffs. His mother and I were strangers he had tried to steal from. I had seen all I needed to see. The fight was finished. The win was complete. And still it sat in my chest like cinders. I looked at my son, my only child, standing in ruins. Ruins he had built himself, stone by stone. I turned to Cecilia. She stood beside me, her hands folded tightly in front of her, her face drained of color, her eyes carrying a grief that had no bottom to it. But she wasn't weeping anymore. Her spine was straight. It's over, Cecilia, I said to her quietly. It's done. I looked at Cortez one final time. He was still rooted to the grass while Renee circled him, pouring her rage over him, dismantling what remained of him, her life, in splinters around her feet. You made your choice, Cortez. No anger left in my voice, only exhaustion. You chose their side. You chose their money and their ambition over your mother's love. I let that sit for a moment. And now you have none of it. You have nothing. I drew Cecilia close my arm across her shoulders. She leaned against me. Oduya, I said, without turning around. We're going inside. Please wrap things up out here. Of course, Mr. Drummond, he replied. Cecilia and I turned away from the screaming from the police lights strobing against the house, from the neighbors lined up along the sidewalk, and from our son. We walked in step with each other back through the door of the house that no longer carried our name, yet had never felt more like a refuge. As we crossed into the entryway, Oduya's voice reached me one last time, firm and unhurried, aimed at the disorder behind us. You have 5 minutes to leave these premises before you are detained for trespassing. Then he followed us in, and the heavy oak door swung shut, sealing them on the other side of our lives for good. The heavy oak door closed with a soft, definitive click, and the living room fell suddenly thickly quiet. The sirens, Renee's screaming, Cortez's desperate voice, all of it cut off at once, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. We were alone. For the first time in 48 hours, it was just me and my wife, Cecilia. Mr. Oduya, discreet as ever, had slipped out through the back. Only the two of us remained standing in a room that was now technically the nerve center of a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation. The same chairs, the same photographs on the walls, but hollow now. What had been a home was something else, a monument to a chapter that had just closed. Cecilia didn't move toward me. She didn't fold into my arms. She didn't say, "Thank you for fighting for me, Ezekiel." She stood where she was, back straight, hands clasped. The terror and grief I had watched her carry all morning were gone. In their place was something I hadn't encountered in a very long time, a cold, precise clarity sharp as a blade. She turned to face me. Why? Not a question, an indictment. Why, what do you mean, Cecilia? I said, pulling at my tie. It's handled. It's over. Why? She said once more, low and trembling, but the trembling wasn't fear now. It was anger gathering itself. Did you deceive me for 45 years? 45 years, Ezekiel. I am your wife. I exhaled. I had known this moment was coming. I didn't deceive you. I didn't share it with you. I was protecting you, protecting Cortez as well. Protecting me. A short, bitter sound came out of her, barely a laugh, alien on her lips. Protecting me from what exactly? From a comfortable life. From never agonizing over every dollar we spent. You didn't protect me, Ezekiel. You let me be humiliated. She stepped toward me, eyes fierce. Last night, I was out on that balcony sobbing. Sobbing because I believed we were about to lose our home, a home you had already signed away without a word to me. You let me feel poor. You let me feel powerless. You let me clip coupons and lose sleep over the electric bill. You sat there and let that woman and those arrogant people of hers treat me like a confused, foolish old woman who had no standing. And you knew the entire time you could have bought and sold them without blinking. You didn't protect me, Ezekiel. You used me. You used me as a prop in your performance of a modest life. That landed harder than Renee's slap had landed on Cortez, because she was right. Who are you? She asked, her voice fracturing. I have spent my life beside a stranger, a man who didn't trust his own wife with the truth of who he was. You want to understand why? My own voice came up now. You think this money is a gift? It's not. It's a weight. It corrupts everything it touches. I crossed to the fireplace and gripped the mantle. I have never spoken about this to anyone, not once. I looked at her. I had an uncle, my father's brother, Floyd. You crossed paths with him years ago at our wedding. I remember him, she said. He had this flashy, sad quality about him. That's exactly what he was, I said. My grandfather hit oil in Texas back in the 1940s. He left the fortune split between his two sons. My father was disciplined. He took his portion, put it to work quietly, and never let it define him. He lived without pretense. Became an engineer, same as me. But Floyd was built differently. The money became his whole identity. The cars, the parties, the crowd of people always at his door. I pulled in a slow breath, the memory still raw after 50 years. He burned through every cent. He chased one bad deal after another, men exactly like Gerald Whitfield, promising him everything and delivering nothing. When the money was gone, so was everyone else. I was 22 years old, Cecilia, fresh out of NC State. I drove to his place in Myers Park because he'd gone silent and no one could reach him. The bank had already begun foreclosure. The house was nearly bare. They'd come for the furniture, the paintings, all of it. I found him, I said, my voice dropping to almost nothing, in his empty study. He had taken his own life. He left a note that said, "I am nothing without the money." He chose death over starting over without wealth. Cecilia's hand rose to cover her mouth. Oh, Ezekiel, I never knew any of that. That day, I said the words thick in my throat. I made a vow over his grave. I would never allow money to become the gravitational center of my family's life. When I sold that patent, I stood at a crossroads. I could become Floyd, or I could be my father. I paused. So I kept it buried, all of it. I wanted Cortez to grow up knowing what it meant to earn something. I wanted him to develop the kind of character that has nothing to do with a bank balance. I didn't want him hollow inside. I didn't want him to become Floyd. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Cecilia studied me, turning over the full weight of what I had carried alone through our entire marriage. At last, she shook her head, a slow and deliberate movement. The anger had drained away, replaced by a sadness that was worse worn and bottomless. "And look what happened, Ezekiel," she said softly. I met her eyes, uncertain. "Look at what happened," she said again with more force behind it. "You guarded him so completely that you shattered him. Your silence didn't give Cortez strength. It bred shame. He grew up believing we were small. He grew up embarrassed by us. Everything is about to shift in a way I did not see coming. Before it does, I want to ask you something honest. If someone you had trusted your whole life turned out to have been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you found out? Or would you hold what you knew close and wait for the right moment? He thought we were nobody. You were so consumed with keeping him away from your past from turning into Floyd that you handed Renee and Gerald the perfect target on a platter. You didn't shield this family, Ezekiel. You just built a different kind of cage. Before I could find words to answer her, before the weight of what she'd said had even settled, my phone rang. Blocked number. I held it a moment, then picked up. "Dad." The voice on the other end was shredded, barely holding together through the sobs. "Cortez, Dad, please, please don't hang up. She's gone, Renee." She took the car and she left. She told me I was a failure. She said she never loved me. My job called. Gerald's entire board is being arrested. They let me go. "I'm ruined, Dad." His voice collapsed into a wail. "I have nothing. I'm at a payphone on the highway. I don't have any money on me. Please, Dad, I'm your son. Please." I stood there and listened to my only child fall apart on the other end of the line. I looked at Cecilia. She was watching me from across the room, her face, ashen eyes hard as flint, waiting to see if I would reach out and pull him back from the fire the way I always had. I pressed the button on the side of my phone. Click. The line went quiet. Cecilia closed her eyes for just a moment. "Who was that?" she asked. I set the phone on the armchair. "Nobody," I said. "Wrong number." 3 days passed. 3 days of a silence so heavy, it had its own presence in the house. Cecilia and I moved through those rooms like two people who had once known each other well and now weren't sure. The foundation staff had quietly taken over the old study desks, brought in files organized, and we existed upstairs like visitors to a place that had stopped belonging to us. The calls from Cortez had stopped. That silence was more unsettling than his pleading had been. I was standing at the kitchen counter, staring into a coffee cup, when the commotion reached me from the front door. No pounding this time, just desperate, frantic weeping. "Please, please, I only need a moment. Let me through." I knew that voice. It was Renee. I made my way to the foyer. Troy, the security manager Oduya had brought on for the foundation, stood blocking the entrance. But the woman behind him was not the Renee I had last laid eyes on. The one who had stood on my lawn, screaming, her face twisted with fury. She had vanished. The woman before me now was in ruins. Her hair was matted, unwashed. She had on sweatpants and a t-shirt with a stain across the front. Her face was swollen and blotched from days of crying, her eyes nearly swollen shut. "Mr. Drummond," Troy said, not moving. "This woman is insisting on seeing you. She's not on the approved list." "Let her in, Troy," I said. He looked surprised but stepped aside. Renee lurched into the foyer and went down. Both knees hit the marble floor, and she stayed there, hands pressed together, her whole body trembling with sobs. She didn't look up at me. She couldn't. "Mr. Drummond, Ezekiel, please." The words came apart as she said them. "Please, I have nowhere else to turn. My parents are in jail. Every account they had is frozen. I'm about to lose my apartment. I have nothing left." I stayed where I was and said nothing. Cecilia had appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching her face unreadable. "I know I have no right to ask," Renee choked out. "I know exactly what I was, what I did. I was a monster, I know that. But this isn't about me." She raised her face slowly, eyes wrecked with tears, and something else, something calculated even now. She placed one hand deliberately over her stomach. "It's about your grandchild." Cecilia made a small, sharp sound. "I lied before," Renee said quickly, her voice ragged. "When I told your wife I was pregnant, that was a lie. I was using it to press her. But I am pregnant now. I found out 2 days ago. 6 weeks." She dug into her pocket and pulled out a wrinkled document. A clinic's positive result, creased from being folded and refolded. "It's Cortez's baby. I swear it on my life. It's his. It's your grandchild." She reached forward and took hold of the hem of my trousers. "You can't let your grandchild come into this world with nothing. Please, Ezekiel, you have the means. Trust something not for me, for the child, just for the baby." I looked down at her. The phantom grandchild had once been a weapon aimed at Cecilia. Now, a real pregnancy was being offered as a shield. The desperation had simply found a new angle and a more repellent one. Cecilia stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Is it true, Renee? Is it really his?" Yes, I swear it." She wept. "I would strongly advise against any financial commitments based on that claim, Mr. Drummond." The voice came from the study doorway. Clarence Oduya walked out, briefcase in hand. He must have let himself in for our 10 o'clock. Renee's head jerked toward him. This is a family matter. This has nothing to do with you." "On the contrary," Oduya said evenly, moving to stand between me and Renee, "it falls squarely within my purview, as you are currently the subject of a $5 million civil action brought by my client's foundation." He glanced down at her stomach. "And your family's claims are as usual factually incorrect." "What are you talking about?" Renee hissed, pushing herself to her feet. "It's his baby. I can prove it." "That won't be necessary," Oduya said. He opened the briefcase. "As you're aware, Miss Renee, your attorney, has been filing petitions as part of the standard discovery process in your divorce from Cortez Drummond." He drew out a single sheet of paper. "In an effort to establish a claim against the Drummond family assets, your counsel filed for spousal support and preemptive child support, a familiar legal maneuver. To bolster that petition, he submitted a preemptive paternity test that you took last week, presumably hoping to lock in Cortez as the father and secure a financial foothold." He held the page up. "We received a certified copy of those results from the court this morning, Miss Renee. According to the DNA test, the one your own legal team commissioned and submitted, the probability of Cortez Drummond being the father of your child is 0%. Renee stared at the document, her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She had stopped crying. She had stopped breathing. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. It's wrong. You falsified it." "We did not," Oduya said, his voice stripped bare of warmth. "It was filed by your own attorneys. However, we did conduct a parallel investigation. Our team, working through the phone and financial records gathered during the fraud discovery, has identified the actual father." He glanced at his notes. "His name is Mr. Alderton, your former supervisor at Whitfield Innovations, the one you have been in a relationship with for the past 8 months." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "The same Mr. Alderton who was taken into federal custody yesterday morning. He was arrested for direct participation in your father, Gerald Whitfield's pension fund embezzlement scheme." Oduya looked at her steadily. "You weren't only deceiving your husband about the child, Miss Renee. You were actively working alongside your father's criminal associates. This house was a small piece of a much larger play. You were running every table at once." Renee didn't scream. She didn't crumple dramatically. She simply sat down on the marble floor as though the bones had gone out of her legs. Everything, the fury, the venom, the layered schemes had drained away completely. She was hollow. The pregnancy was real. The father was not who she claimed. She had spun a web so elaborate that she was now its prisoner, stuck at the center with no thread left to pull. She looked up at me, her eyes empty. "Help me," she whispered. "Please." I looked at her, this woman who had made it her life's work to break my wife. This woman who had taken my son as a business acquisition. This woman who had conspired alongside criminals. I turned to Troy. "Miss Renee is trespassing. Please see her out." Troy gave a single nod, stepped forward, and got her to her feet with firm, unhurried hands. "Ma'am, you need to go." She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She let him guide her across the foyer and through the front door, like a ghost being removed from a house she had never, not for a single day, genuinely belonged in. I walked to the living room window. Cecilia was already there. We stood together and watched as Troy brought her down the front walk to the curb. She stood there alone on the street for a long moment, then turned and walked away, vanishing around the corner. Cecilia laid a hand against the cold glass. There was no triumph in her face, only a sadness that went all the way down. "She's lost Ezekiel," she said softly. "She has absolutely nothing left." "If she has the consequences of her choices, Cecilia," I said, "and so do we." Cecilia's grief had weight to it. You could feel it pressing down on every room in the house. After Renee was walked off the property, a new silence moved in, heavier than the one before. The frantic, desperate energy had burned itself out, and what remained was a void. The calls from Cortez, the ones soaked in self-pity and pleading, had dried up entirely. At first, that quiet gave me a grim kind of relief. He'd finally gotten the message, but 2 days in the silence started to change its character. It felt wrong. Final. Cecilia began to pace, kitchen window to living room window, back again, staring out at the empty street. "He hasn't called Ezekiel," she said on the third morning, her voice worn thin. "Good," I said, keeping my voice flat and hard. "He has nothing worth saying." "No." She turned. The sorrow in her eyes had a new edge to it, now something close to terror. "You don't know him the way I do. He's not built like you. He's not strong. He's impulsive. He's like—" She stopped, her hand going to her mouth. I already knew where that sentence was going. He was like my Uncle Floyd, the man who had decided that shame was something you only survived one way. He had just lost everything. Cecilia's voice dropped to a whisper. His wife, his job, his home, his in-laws, the child he believed was his. He just learned that his entire life was constructed on lies. What if he does something he can't come back from? That landed. She had every right to be afraid. My son was not strong. I had watched it. I had, in ways I didn't want to admit, helped make him that way. That same fragility was what had made him easy prey for Renee to begin with. And now, it could turn inward. "He's just lying low, Cecilia," I said, but it sounded hollow as I said it. "He's embarrassed. He'll surface when he gets hungry enough." A week went by, then 10 days. Gerald and Paulette had already been processed. The Whitfield Innovations fraud was front-page news across Charlotte. Renee had gone to ground, most likely sheltering with whatever was left of her social circle. But Cortez, my son, had vanished completely. Cecilia was coming apart. She wasn't eating. She had taken to sitting in the foundation office, what used to be the study, staring at the phone, bracing herself for a call from a police department or a morgue. On the 12th day, I couldn't watch her suffer anymore. My fury at Cortez was still alive, a hot coal buried in my chest, but my love for this woman was older and stronger than any of it. I went to find her in the study. "I'll find him." She looked up, her eyes raw with desperation. "You will—" "I won't speak to him," I said, laying out what I was and wasn't offering. "I won't make him any promises, but I will find out where he is. I'll confirm he's alive." I called Clarence Oduya. "I need your investigator, Clarence, the best one you have. Find my son. No contact, I just want a location. Proof that he's breathing." The search got underway, and what came back in pieces painted a picture that turned my stomach. Oduya's investigator was methodical. The first report arrived 2 days later. "Mr. Drummond Cortez Drummond's credit cards have all been declined. His accounts are empty. His condo has been foreclosed. His car was repossessed 3 days ago." I read it aloud to Cecilia. She wept without a sound. The next report came 3 days after that. "We have a possible sighting. A man fitting his description registered at a day labor office in Belmont using his social security number. By the time our operative reached the site, he had already collected his daily pay, $50 in cash, and gone. The trail ends there, but we know he's on foot and working off the books. $50. My son, who had worn tailored suits and helped himself to my best whiskey, collecting $50 at the end of a shift. He's working, Cecilia said, gripping that small fact like it was a lifeline. Ezekiel, he's working. That's something, isn't it? It's something, I said. The investigation pushed deeper into the margins. The investigator began working the places where men go when they've run out of everywhere else: weekly rate motels, shelters, soup kitchen lines. The next file Oduya sent over contained photographs, grainy, taken at night in bleak and desperate locations. The Charlotte Rescue Mission, a queue of men stretching outside a church waiting on a hot meal, a flop house where rooms turned over by the hour. Is he in one of those? I asked Oduya over the phone. Not yet, he said. But that's the orbit he's moving in. He's running low on options. Ezekiel, no car, no credit, no address. He is off the grid entirely. For the first time, my anger stepped back, and something colder took its place. Floyd's face came to me, the empty rooms, the note on the floor. I am nothing without the money. Had I done this? Had the choice I made to bury my wealth, to protect him from? It actually been what broke him. Then, close to a month into the search, the call came. I found him. The investigator's voice gave nothing away. He's not on the street. He has work and he has a room. You're not going to like the details. Where? There's a warehouse complex near the old rail yards in Gastonia. He's on a non-union loading crew, cash at the end of every shift. He's renting a room by the week at the Starlight Motel across the road. The Starlight. I knew that place. You ended up at the Starlight when every other door had closed. Thank you, I said. Send me the address, send me the invoice. I didn't breathe a word to Cecilia. I got in my car, my simple 12-year-old pickup truck, and drove. I went past the glass towers of Uptown, past the landscape streets of Dilworth, and out into the industrial bones of the city where the asphalt had buckled and rust-stained everything. I found the warehouse a vast corrugated tin building, roaring with trucks and machinery. I parked across the street near the motel. The Starlight sign was missing the S. It just read Tarlight. I sat there for 2 hours, watching. At 5 o'clock, a bell rang out. The bay doors rolled back, and a stream of men pushed through, covered in grime and sweat and the soot of a long day's work. I went face by face through the crowd, my pulse loud in my ears. He wasn't there. My God, I thought. Did he leave early? Did I miss him? And then I saw him. I nearly didn't. The son I had known was gone. The man who came through those doors was someone else. He had shed 30, maybe 40 pounds. His face was hollowed out beneath a matted, dirty beard. The clothes on his back, old jeans, a torn shirt hung loose on a frame that had nothing left to spare. His shoulders weren't bent with humiliation. They were bent with the kind of physical exhaustion that goes all the way into the bone. I sat frozen as he crossed to a man holding a clipboard and a metal cash box. The man found his name, counted out some bills, and passed them over. Cortez took the cash without looking at it, folded it, tucked it away. He didn't head for the motel. He walked right past my truck, eyes down, and turned into the small, grimy convenience store on the corner. I waited. 5 minutes later, he came back out. In one hand, he carried a can of soup and a box of crackers as dinner. He started back toward the motel. He was nearly level with my truck when he slowed. He must have caught his reflection in the tinted glass. He stopped and stood there, looking at the broken man, looking back at him. Then slowly, he turned his head. He saw me. He didn't bolt. He didn't fall to his knees. He didn't say a word. He just stood there on that cracked sidewalk holding his dinner, the exhaustion in his eyes so complete it looked like something permanent, like it had been pressed into him and dried there. I pushed open the door and stepped out. We stood 10 feet apart, nothing around us but the sound of a freight train somewhere in the distance. He looked at me, then at the food in his hands. His throat moved as he swallowed. Hello, Dad." His voice had gone to gravel. I couldn't locate the anger. It was simply gone. All that remained was this hollow, aching space carved out in the center of my chest. "What are you doing here, Cortez?" He looked back at the warehouse, then at the bills folded in his other hand. "Paying the price." I drove away from that place with the image sealed into me. Not the man in the suit who had stood on my porch with his schemes and his contempt, but this one. This hollowed-out shell, gaunt and filthy, holding a can of soup like it was worth something. I had gone there expecting anger. I had expected the cold, clean feeling of justice running its course. Instead, I felt nothing but empty. He hadn't asked me for $1. He hadn't begged for forgiveness. He hadn't offered a single excuse. Just those dead empty eyes and 2 words, paying the price. I drove back to my suite at the Kimpton Tryon Park Hotel, those words chasing me the whole way. What price exactly? The cost of betraying his mother. The cost of choosing greed over decency. It felt too neat. The man I had seen at that warehouse was being ground down by something beyond shame alone. Something was hunting him from the inside. I sat in the stillness of my room, the Charlotte skyline burning in the dark below, and it crept up on me the feeling that I had missed a layer, that there was more to peel from this rotten thing. Then my phone rang, Clarence Oduya, all business in his voice, but something underneath it, an urgency he was keeping in check. Ezekiel. He said no greeting. Good that I reached you. We found it. Found what Clarence... I was worn out. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. I just came from seeing Cortez. I'm not sure I can absorb much more tonight. A pause. You'll want to hear this, Oduya said. We found the real reason, the why behind all of it. I sat up. Go ahead. Gerald Whitfield. We knew the man was insolvent. We knew his company was built on vapor, but we hadn't understood just how desperate things had gotten. My forensic accountants have been locked in with the Whitfield Innovations books for 72 hours. They've just come up with their preliminary findings. And it isn't simply bad investments, Ezekiel. It's criminal. This man didn't just lose money. He stole it. I tightened my grip on the phone. From who? His investors, and worse. Oduya said, his voice dropping. From his own employees. For the past 3 years, Gerald Whitfield has been systematically draining his company's 401k pension fund. A little at first, just enough to cover a bad quarter, he probably convinced himself. But the hole kept opening wider. The market turned against him. His deals collapsed. He kept digging. How bad? I asked, though the dread was already settling in. The shortfall in that pension fund, Oduya said, currently stands at $2.2 million. Money belonging to 65 people who punch a clock for him every day. Their retirement savings, their futures, gone. The sickness hit me immediately, and he actually thought that selling my house would let him fill that hole. I was his lifeline. Oduya confirmed it. A federal audit was set for February 1st. Gerald had until that date to restore the $2.2 million, or he was walking into a federal penitentiary. Selling your house wasn't a scheme to get rich, Ezekiel. It was the only thing standing between him and a prison sentence. I said nothing. I sat with the full cold weight of it, the audacity of using my wealth to bury his own crime. But Cortez. I said, the image of my son at that warehouse still branded in my mind. He didn't know any of that. He just believed he was getting in on an investment. He's weak, but he's not. He isn't capable of that. The silence on the other end ran longer this time, heavier. Ezekiel, Oduya said, and I heard something in his voice that I didn't like, a reluctance. That's the other matter, the one we've been working to confirm. We need to talk about Cortez. What about him? He knew. The word struck me like something physical. He knew. He knew Gerald was stealing from those people. He did, Oduya said. And not only that, Ezekiel, he was the one who uncovered it. About 8 months ago, Cortez, whatever his failings, is not a fool when it comes to numbers. He's an accountant. He was reviewing partnership reports that Gerald was pushing him to sign off on, and he spotted the discrepancies. He dug into it himself and found the $2 million hole. Something strange moved through me, a bitter, involuntary flash of pride. So, he was going to expose him. That's what this was really about. That appears to have been his intention at first, Oduya said. We pulled the security logs from the Whitfield Innovations offices. There's footage from a late-night meeting between Cortez and Gerald 8 months ago. The room is tense. Cortez confronts him. Gerald denies it. Then Cortez drops a file on the table, his proof. So what stopped him? I demanded. Why didn't he go straight to the police? Because Gerald had a file of his own on Cortez. I went cold. What are you talking about? Oduya exhaled slowly. Ezekiel, it seems your son wasn't only weak, he was compromised. For the past year, Cortez has been carrying on an affair. An affair we already know about the baby Renee's boss, No. Oduya said quietly, cutting in. Not that one. A separate one. This was before Renee's affair came to light. A woman at his own company. A junior analyst. I sat very still. I don't follow. Your son was living an expensive parallel life. Oduya explained, his tone flat and professional. He was taking this woman on trips, buying her costly gifts. He even co-signed the lease on her apartment in Uptown. And he wasn't funding any of it from his own salary. Ezekiel. Don't, I whispered, dropping back into the chair. He was running it through the company accounts, Oduya said. Falsified expense reports, petty theft in the grand scheme of things, but it accumulated nearly $60,000 over 9 months. Gerald discovered it the same week Cortez found the pension fund fraud. The last rotten piece of the picture locked into place. A standoff, Oduya said. Mutually assured destruction. They blackmailed each other, I said. The words tasted like something corrosive. Precisely. Gerald's terms were clear. You expose my $2 million felony, and I expose your $60,000 felony and the affair. You go to prison. You lose your wife. You're finished. So, they negotiated. And the deal, I said, was my house. It was the only exit either of them could see, Oduya confirmed. Gerald urgently needed the proceeds from the sale to cover the pension shortfall before the auditors arrived. Cortez urgently needed the investment to go through so he could quietly repay the $60,000 he had taken before Gerald turned that information over to Renee and destroyed him. It was a perfect, terrible trap. Oduya continued, and Gerald was shrewd about it. He put Cortez at the front of the entire operation. He made Cortez the one pressing you and Cecilia. That was his insurance. By making Cortez the visible face of the scheme, he made him a full co-conspirator. Cortez couldn't walk away. He couldn't go to the authorities. He was locked in. I ended the call. I crossed to the window and stood looking out at the city spread below me. I thought about my son on the other side of Charlotte in that grimy motel room, eating a can of soup and crackers off whatever surface passed for a table. He wasn't simply paying the price. He was locked inside a cell he had assembled around himself with his own hands, one bolt at a time. He was a coward. He was a thief. He was an adulterer. And he was my son. I stood at that window a long time after I hung up with Oduya. I didn't move. What he had laid out for me was uglier than anything I had let myself imagine. My son wasn't only weak. He wasn't simply a victim of other people's schemes. He was a thief. He was an adulterer, and he was a willing partner in a conspiracy aimed directly at his own mother. Blackmailed into it, yes, but blackmailed by the consequences of his own selfish small crimes. He had stood beside me on that porch and begged me not to bring the whole thing down, not out of love for anyone, out of terror that it would expose him. I had to bring this to Cecilia. It was her truth as much as mine. It belonged to her. I drove back to the house, our house, the Foundation's house now. I found her in the study encircled by cardboard boxes. She was sorting through 45 years of our life together, separating the personal from what would become office files. She looked up as I came in. The sadness hadn't left her face, but her hands were steady. She was in motion, moving forward. "What is it now, Ezekiel?" she asked. "More bad news. I don't know that I have room left for it." I settled on the edge of the desk. "It's about Cortez, the whole truth of it." I told her everything, what Oduya had uncovered, the affair with the colleague, the $60,000 in stolen company money, the confrontation with Gerald, the mutual blackmail that had chained all of our fates together. I told her how our son had been caught in a trap and how he had been the one who laid the first stone of it. She listened. She didn't weep. She didn't flinch. Her face simply went still, a profound, terrible stillness that was far more frightening than any of her tears had been. When I finished, a full minute passed in silence. She stared at the wall, at a framed photograph of a 9-year-old Cortez holding a fishing rod. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Gerald was a criminal. He knew what they were planning to do to us, and he let it proceed. He helped it proceed. To save himself." "Cecilia," I started. "He was trapped. He was weak," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "A thief and a coward." She got to her feet and looked me dead in the eye. Then came the words I had no answer for. "And so were you, Ezekiel." I flinched like she'd struck me. What are you even saying? I just protected everything we have. Did you, though? You told me a story about your uncle," she said. "A man that money hollowed out. A man who pressed a shotgun to his own mouth because he couldn't imagine himself worth anything without wealth. And you've spent 45 years sprinting away from that memory. I was keeping us safe, I insisted. I was keeping Cortez safe. No, she said, closing the distance between us. What you were doing was keeping us under your thumb. You were guarding your own secret. Your fear of what money could do to people, it consumed you so completely, you never once let us in on the truth. You treated me like someone who needed to be managed, Ezekiel. You let me count every coupon. You let me lose sleep over the mortgage payments. You kept me living a fiction the same way Cortez did. There's no daylight between you two. Both of you deceived me to get what you wanted out of this family. He was chasing dollars. You were chasing the feeling of being untouchable, of holding everything together. And she was right. Standing there, I understood that revealing my fortune hadn't been a moment of power. It had been an exposure. I had been deceiving her just as surely as anyone else, not for a day, not for a year, but across the full length of our marriage. She reached for a box of old photographs. I need some distance, Ezekiel. I can't stay under this roof right now. What do you mean? I asked, a cold surge of panic spreading through my chest. Where are you going to go? We can find a new house somewhere, fresh anywhere you want. Buy, she said, the word falling from her mouth like something rotten. That's the only move, isn't it? Spend, control, bury everything. No more. I will not keep being buried. She set the box aside. This foundation, the Cecilia Drummond Foundation, you planted my name above that door as what exactly? A trophy? A gesture? An attempt at forgiveness? Fine. Then it belongs to me. I stood there trying to follow her. It is yours. It belongs to both of us. No, she said firmly. It is mine. If my name is the one over that entrance, then I'm going to lead it, genuinely lead it. Not as the woman standing quietly behind you, but as its president, its CEO. You're welcome to a seat on the board, but the decisions run through me. I couldn't find words. 3 days ago, this woman had been weeping on the balcony, and now, our first undertaking, she said, eyes burning with something alive in them that I hadn't witnessed since we were young, is a girls' school in Kenya. I've been studying up on it. The funding gap is real. What they need beyond money is someone willing to actually be there. Kenya. I managed, you're talking about going to Africa. I am, she said. My flight leaves Friday. 6 months minimum, maybe more. I have to step outside of being your wife, outside of being his mother. I need to just be Cecilia for once in my life. She moved past me without slowing, leaving me rooted in the center of that room, surrounded by everything our family used to be. Alone. Completely, absolutely alone, a feeling I had never truly known before that moment. Cecilia left 3 days later. I took her to Charlotte Douglas International Airport myself. Neither of us had much to say. When I reached for an apology one more time, she simply pressed her hand to my arm. Stop, Ezekiel. Words don't cost anything. I've been paid in cheap words my whole life. Just keep the fun running. I'll reach out. I stood and watched her move toward the security checkpoint, spine, rigid eyes forward, never turning around. I came home to that house, the quiet, hollow house. Foundation staff moved through its rooms like ghosts, but none of them were mine. I'd lower myself into the armchair, the same chair from that very first morning, and just sit with it. Cecilia was right about everything. I had let the fear of Cortez turning into my Uncle Floyd, a man devoured by his own wealth, blind me to what my silence was actually producing. My so-called protection was never a shield. It was 4 walls and a locked door. It had carved a hollow right through the middle of my son. I had shown him that our life, humble, unglamorous, hard-earned, was simply what life was. I never explained the reasoning. I never sat him down and talked about character, about what holds a person together when everything gets stripped away, because I was too busy maintaining my own enormous lie. I had taught him to be embarrassed by where we came from. In doing that, I had sculpted the ideal Mark, hungry, rootless, desperate for something shinier. The first time someone like Gerald Whitfield dangled real money and real status in front of him, Cortez didn't hesitate. I had worked so hard to shield him from wealth that I left him completely defenseless against his own hunger for it. I had failed him as a son's father. I had failed her as a wife's husband. All that money and the woman I loved was somewhere on the other side of the earth. My son was face down in the wreckage of his own choices. My in-laws were sitting in jail cells. About a week after all of it, I found myself doing something I never planned. I drove out to the county jail, took a seat in the visitation room with thick glass separating me from whatever Gerald Whitfield had become. He was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a gray, defeated emptiness. He sat down. He didn't look at me. "You're not on my visitors list," he mumbled. "I own the prison's food supplier," I said. "They make exceptions." He lifted his eyes eventually. Nothing behind them. "What do you want?" "You come here to gloat, old man. Enjoy watching me rot in here." "No," I told him. "I came for one thing. An answer. You were already going down the pension fund fraud alone was a 20-year sentence waiting to happen. You had no reason to touch my house. No reason to drag anyone in my family into this." I pressed closer to the glass between us. "So, I need to understand. My son. Why did you have to bring Cortez into your rot?" Gerald held my stare for a long beat. Cold, deliberate, full of hate. Then his mouth moved into a smile. Awful, yellow-toothed. "You really want an answer to that?" he rasped. "Because he came easy." He leaned in, putting his face near the glass, his whole expression curdled with contempt. The second I gave him a glimpse of the life he'd been craving, he caved completely. Weak to his core, greedy straight through, and so hungry to be anyone but his father that he'd have agreed to anything. He wrapped a dirty fingernail against the glass. "He's made of the same stuff I am, Ezekiel, soft and grasping. And you're the craftsman who built him that way." Those words from Gerald's mouth drove something through me that couldn't be undone. Weak and grasping. Built by me. I left the jail and didn't head back to the hotel. I drove straight to the house, sat myself down in the dark living room like I had that very first morning, the day all of this cracked open. But there was no waiting this time. No Cecilia about to call me for breakfast. I just sat. Cecilia had been right. Uncle Floyd had been a man, money dismantled piece by piece. And so, I had stacked lie upon lie to keep that fate away from my son. But the lies hadn't kept him safe. They'd kept him blind, kept him soft. I had grown a 40-year-old child, a man who had no backbone, no moral fiber, no real grip on how the world works. When a man like Gerald Whitfield smelled that in him, he moved without hesitation. I hadn't raised a son strong enough to survive. I had handed him over. I buried myself in the only thing still standing, the foundation. A full year went by. That address, 412 Dilworth Road, bore no resemblance to the home it once was. Every trace of what it had been was overwritten. The carpeting was out, practical commercial flooring put in its place. The living room where Renee had nursed her misery and Cortez had filled the air with laughter was now an intake center, rows of sterile desks and cubicle partitions. My old study had become the legal aid office. The dining room that had held 45 years of Thanksgiving dinners was now the main boardroom ruled by a long, gleaming mahogany table. The Cecilia Drummond Foundation had outgrown being a concept. It had become something that moved and struck a hard-driving nonprofit with a staff of 12, a brigade of pro bono attorneys, and a backlog of women who had spent years being made to feel invisible and were now learning to push back. I had a board seat. I handled the treasury. I was the reservoir. I authorized every check. I combed through every portfolio. The money was mine to move, and I moved it. But the authority was not mine. That belonged to the president and CEO, Cecilia. 364 days since I had last seen her face in person. Twice a week, we sat across a video call. Her in a makeshift workspace in Nairobi, me at the mahogany table that used to be where we ate as a family. She ran those calls like a general, tight, purposeful, no room for drift. The woman on that screen bore no resemblance to the one who had cried on the balcony. She was someone who issued directives now. Someone raising buildings, opening shelters, rewriting ordinances. She had grown into her own power inside the wreckage of what our family had become. When the day came that she was flying home, I drove to meet her. Standing at the international arrivals gate, I felt something flutter in my chest, a nervousness I hadn't carried in decades. I had no idea which version of Cecilia was about to walk through those doors. The woman who stepped through those doors was a stranger to the one who had gone. The Cecilia who left was a 69-year-old retired school teacher, her graying hair pinned back in a plain bun, eyes that had always carried a slight downward tilt, cautious, wary. The woman who came back was something else entirely. She had on white linen trousers, a brightly colored Kenyan wrap blouse, and her hair was cut close, framing a face that radiated certainty and strength. She moved through the crowd with a pace and a bearing that made people step aside without thinking. She wasn't merely confident, she had authority. She spotted me standing there and didn't quicken her step. No smile came first. She simply walked straight toward me, her gaze level and clear. "Ezekiel," she said. Her voice was full and steady. "Cecilia," I replied. "You look extraordinary." "I feel extraordinary," she said. She didn't come in for an embrace. She extended her hand. I took it. Her grip didn't waver. The school in Nairobi is fully funded. We broke ground on the dormitory last week. The girls are already asking for a computer lab. We rode back together. The quiet between us in that car was nothing like the suffocating silence of our final days before she left. This was a different kind of quiet. Orderly. Considered. We weren't a wounded couple limping forward. We were two professionals sharing a vehicle. I was the one who held the money. She was the one who knew what to do with it. She was the CEO. I was simply a member of her board. A fortnight later, we sat down for our first face-to-face board meeting, gathered around the long table that had once been our dining room. Cecilia held the head of it, running the room, walking the group through next quarter's budget. I took the far end and listened. The staff lawyers, accountants, the new program director, all tracked her. She belonged there. She was a leader in the truest sense. Midway through her presentation on a new microloan initiative, there came a knock. Not at the front door. The side door, the old service entrance off the kitchen. It was tentative, barely more than a scratch against the wood. Cecilia paused, her expression sharpening with irritation. "Troy," she said, addressing the security manager at the back of the room. "Would you check on that? We're not taking walk-ins today. Direct them to schedule an appointment." Troy gave a nod and stepped out. We heard the side door swing open, then a man's voice muffled low, the tone of someone making a case they don't expect to win. Then Troy's steady reply, "I'm sorry, sir. You can't be here. You need to leave." The voice climbed just a notch enough to reach us. "Please, I just need to speak to her. To one of them. Please." Cecilia exhaled her patience, visibly fraying. "Troy, what is it?" Troy filled the doorway again. Something in his face had shifted. He looked uncomfortable in his own skin. His complexion had gone pale. "Mrs. Drummond," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a man at the door. He's asking for you, or for Mr. Drummond. Says it's a personal matter." "I'm in the middle of a board meeting," Cecilia said, her voice cutting clean. "Send him away. If he won't go, call the police," Ma'am Troy said, edging further into the room. "I think you need to come see this for yourself. It's Cortez Drummond." The room turned to stone. Every person at that table had heard the story. They all knew who Cortez was. Cecilia's face didn't fall. It set like concrete hardening. Anger, not grief. "Tell him to go," Ma'am Troy pressed. He doesn't look well." I got to my feet. Every head swung toward me. "I'll take care of it," I said. I moved out of the boardroom, through the kitchen that now served as a break room, and made my way to the side door. I steeled myself for whatever waited on the other side, the pleading, the fury, the stench of liquor, the litany of excuses. I pulled the door open. The man on the back steps was not the one I'd last seen at the warehouse. He was thinner, startlingly so. The past year had cut deep furrows into his face, but he was clean, hair trimmed neat, face shaved smooth. He had on a worn but clean pair of canvas work pants and a faded gray Henley. In his hands he twisted a beat-up baseball cap, knuckles going white around the brim. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't riding anything. He just looked like a man bracing for impact. When he caught sight of me, he flinched a full-body recoil, as though he was certain I was about to swing at him. But he didn't move off the step. "Hello, Dad," he said. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Why are you here, Cortez?" His eyes dropped to his worn-out boots. He pulled in a shaking breath. "I'm not here to ask for anything. Not money, I promise." He lifted his eyes to mine. They were clear, sober, terrified in a way that went deeper than just facing me. "I heard," he said, his voice fracturing at the edges. "I saw the sign out front, the foundation. I heard you're helping people." "We are," I said, keeping my voice hard. "But not people like you." "I know," he said quickly, the words stumbling over each other. "I know I'm not asking for that." He steadied himself with another breath. "What I'm here to ask for is a job." I just looked at him. "A job." "Yes, sir," he said. "I've been working loading docks, construction, anything that pays cash, whatever comes." But I heard the main floor bathroom plumbing is backed up. I know how to fix pipes. I know every corner of this house. I'll do whatever is needed. Maintenance, janitorial, sweeping the walk, anything at all. Please. I stood there studying this stranger on the back steps of a house he once believed he'd inherit, begging for work, asking to sweep floors. Before I could form a single word, another voice sliced through the air, a voice I hadn't heard in the flesh for a full year. What is he doing here? Cecilia stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded across her chest, her face unreadable. Not the wife, the CEO. Cortez flinched, hard eyes jumping to her and then immediately diving back to the ground. Mrs. Drummond, he said, his voice barely audible. I was just asking Mr. Drummond. I'm looking for work. I know how to fix things. The plumbing, I know what's wrong with it. Cecilia cut across him before he could finish. She turned to Troy, still hovering nearby. Troy, please return to the boardroom. Ezekiel and I will deal with this. Troy disappeared without a word, leaving the three of us in the cold, still kitchen, the wreckage of what we'd once been. Cecilia crossed to the coffee machine and poured herself a cup. She offered none to me, none to him. She drank. You're looking for work, she said, not a question. Yes, ma'am, you have experience. I worked at Sterling Innovations. He stumbled. As an accountant, Cecilia said, her voice flat as pavement. We don't need an accountant. We have a full team. They're excellent. They don't steal. Cortez absorbed that, like a blow the same way Renee's slap must have landed. He said nothing. I have other experience, he said, quieter now. Loading freight construction work. I can paint. Hang drywall. Fix the pipes. Cecilia studied him for a long, measured beat. I could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the mother and the CEO circling each other. The CEO prevailed. We do have an opening, she said. General maintenance, janitorial. I nearly said something. Janitorial. I swallowed it. This was her foundation, her call. The wage, Cecilia continued, is minimum $10 an hour, no benefits. At-will employment. You'll report to Troy, head of operations. You do not report to me. You do not address me directly. You do not speak to Mr. Drummond. You arrive at 7 a.m. You leave at 4 p.m. You do not enter the main house unless the repair is documented and approved. Are we clear? Cortez's head came up sharply. What crossed his face wasn't humiliation or rage. It was relief, the raw, desperate relief of someone drowning who feels something solid brush their fingertips. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice thick with it. Thank you, ma'am. That is absolutely clear. Then be here at 7 tomorrow morning, she said. Come through the service entrance. Do not knock on this door again. She turned on her heel, walked back through the kitchen, and returned to her board meeting without so much as a backward look. Cortez stood there working his hat between his palms. His eyes found mine, heavy with 1,000 things he couldn't say. She said 7 a.m. I told him, my voice flat. Don't show up late. Yes, sir, he whispered. He turned and walked away. And that was how it started. For the next 6 months, I watched my son become a shadow, drifting through the house where he grew up. I say watched, but really Cecilia and I observed from a remove, through study windows, through security monitors. We never discussed it directly. We talked about the foundation's finances, the school in Kenya, the new legal cases coming in, but we never once acknowledged the man who stepped off the bus each morning in work boots with a metal lunch pail in his hand. He showed up. He did what was asked. Not a murmur of complaint from him, not once. I watched him spend an entire day folded into the crawl space working on pipes that had been seeping for years, the same pipes I had once asked him to look at, back when he was still playing the role of the successful son. He came out of that crawl space caked in grime, but the pipes held. I watched him push a mower across the same lawn he had once tried to claim as his own. I watched him eat lunch, a sandwich, and an apple alone on the back steps. The staff treated him with courtesy, but kept their distance. Every one of them knew the history. They knew exactly who he was. He was a pariah, a walking, breathing lesson in what greed costs. He was first through the door in the morning and last out at night. He never pushed for more money, never angled for a different assignment. He simply worked, paying the price he said he would. One afternoon, I spotted him out in the yard, raking leaves. Cecilia was in the boardroom, which has a broad window looking out over that side of the grounds. She thought I couldn't see her from where I stood, but I could. She held her position at that window for nearly 10 minutes, watching him move through the yard. Her expression gave away nothing, But when she finally turned from the glass, she brushed something away from her eye. Winter settled in. Christmas was closing in, nearly a full year since that awful night that had cracked everything open. I was alone in the office late going through the year-end Apex reports. The building had emptied out. Cecilia was off at a fundraising dinner. Then I caught a sound drifting from the main foyer. The slosh and roll of a mop bucket. I stepped out of the study. There was Cortez working the marble floor. 8 o'clock at night. "You're here late," I said. He startled, nearly dropping the handle. "Mr. Drummond, Sir Troy asked me to strip and wax the floors. The salt tracking in from the snow has been tearing them up. I figured I'd get it done tonight while the building was empty." "I see," I said. "Carry on." I was already turning back toward my office when the front doors of the foundation slammed open. Cold night air cut through the foyer, and behind it came a woman. "I know he's in here. Don't put your hands on me." It was Renee. Troy, working security, was right on her heels, reaching for her arm. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property. I will contact the police." But Renee wasn't looking at Troy. She wasn't looking at me either. Her eyes locked on Cortez, who stood there motionless, a dirty mop in his grip. I almost didn't know her. The woman from the porch had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. This woman was gaunt, hollowed out, her hair brassy damaged. She had on a thin, dirty coat, and in one hand she carried a baby carrier. The baby inside was fussing. She looked at Cortez, she looked at the mop, she looked at the bucket of gray water, and then she laughed a horrible, dry, cracked sound, with no warmth in it anywhere. "Oh my God," she said, her voice scraped raw. "Look at you. Just look at you. The great Cortez Drummond, the heir to the Apex Fund. You're a janitor." Cortez didn't move. "You need to leave, Renee. You're not permitted here. Not permitted." She shrieked, the sound bouncing off the walls of the empty room. "I came here for you. I came to get you out of this, and you're pushing a mop around." She moved closer, her eyes wild and unsteady. "Are you out of your mind? Do you understand what they took from us? They gutted us." That woman, she stabbed a finger in the direction of the study where she assumed Cecilia was. "She took everything that was ours. This is your house, Cortez. That is your money. Your father is a billionaire, and you are cleaning his floors." "It's not my house," Cortez said, his voice low and even. "Don't be an idiot," she snapped. "He's running a test. She's running a test. Stop cowering. Stop folding." She seized his arm, fingernails pressing through the fabric of his work shirt. "Cortez, listen to what I'm telling you. Get rid of her. Get rid of him. Take back what belongs to you. We can still turn this around. We can sue. We can go to the press with what they did." "What we did, you mean?" Cortez said. "It doesn't matter," she screamed. "Cortez, please. I have nothing. Alderton is in jail. My own parents won't return my calls. I'm in a shelter with his baby," she rattled the carrier. "Please, Cortez, just be a man for once in your life. Fight. Take it all back. For us." She was gasping now, her face shoved nearly into his, her eyes a portrait of desperate hunger. Cortez looked at her. He looked at this screaming, cornered woman. He looked at the crying child. He looked at the wreckage of the life he had chosen, the life that had ground him down to nothing. And then slowly and deliberately, he peeled her hand from his arm. He set the mop against the wall. He pulled himself upright. He looked lean. Yes, but for the first time, he stood tall. "It was never my house, Renee." He said, his voice carrying a steadiness I hadn't heard from him in years. "It was his. Now it's hers. I was never the heir to anything. I was just a disappointment." But she fumbled, thrown by the calm in him. "I am not the janitor," Cortez said. His eyes were clear when they met hers. "I am a janitor, and for the first time in my entire life, Renee, I am actually doing real work." He stepped back, lifted the mop, and lowered it into the bucket. "You need to go," he said, without looking at her again. "Go, and don't ever come back here." He turned his back on her, turned his back on the baby, on everything that had been on the greed, on all of it. And he went back to mopping the floor. Renee's exit left a hollow in the foyer. Her voice faded down the street until all that remained was the hum of equipment in the study and the steady rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Cortez's mop against the marble. He never looked up. He gave no sign. He knew I was still standing there. He just kept at it, shoulders set, movements deliberate. He was scrubbing away the last residue of the life that had just walked back out the door. I turned around and went back to my office. 6 months went by. The world continued moving. Gerald and Paulette Whitfield were convicted. Gerald received 10 years for embezzlement and securities fraud. Paulette received 3 years for conspiracy. Renee, stripped of everything she had counted on, simply vanished. Word filtered back that she'd gone west to stay with a distant relative, and the baby had been adopted by a family in another state. And Cortez worked. He was off the bus and through the service entrance at 6:55 a.m. every morning without fail. He clocked in. He repaired the dripping faucets. He swapped out the aging electrical sockets. He rolled fresh paint on every wall in the foundation, turning the old rooms of our house into something professional and welcoming. He ate alone on the back steps at lunch. He clocked out at 4 p.m. He didn't speak unless addressed first. He never requested a raise, never asked anyone for a favor. He just worked, paying his price. Cecilia and I had settled into a new pattern. We were genuine partners now, something we had never quite managed before. She was the living heart of the foundation. I was the quiet machinery underneath it, managing the apex fund that kept the whole operation breathing. We held meetings. We went over budgets together. We were measured, respectful colleagues who happened to share a penthouse apartment nearby. The frost between us was easing, but the break hadn't fully healed. Then Christmas came around again, 2 full years from that first terrible night. The house at 412 Dilworth Road was alive, but nothing like the sounds that had filled it before. This time it was light and music, and the most prominent people in Charlotte gathered under one roof. The Cecilia Drummond Foundation was hosting its inaugural annual fundraising gala. I stood at the back of the room that used to be my living room, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I watched my wife. Lord, I watched my wife. Cecilia stood at a podium under a soft spotlight. She wore an elegant burgundy gown, her short silver hair framing her face. She was radiant, commanding. She was offering her thanks to the donors, the mayor, the senators, the CEOs, who had shown up to stand behind her work. This foundation, she said, her voice ringing clear through every corner of that crowded room, is built on one simple belief, that it is never too late to rebuild, that it is never too late to rediscover your own strength. This very house is proof of that. It was once a place of pain, a place where secrets lived in the walls. Now it is a place of healing, where women who were silenced, overlooked, and broken down can find their voices again. She paused and reached for her water glass. But this work does not get done alone. It demands a committed, relentless staff. People who believe in what we're building here. People who show up every single day regardless of the weather, regardless of the difficulty. People who fix what is broken. Her gaze moved toward the back of the room near the service door. The work we have accomplished over these past 6 months would not have been possible without the commitment of our new facilities manager. A man who has personally fixed every broken pipe in this building, rewired every faulty circuit, and repainted every wall from top to bottom. A man who has given this place everything he has without a single complaint and with more quiet dedication than I have ever witnessed. The room followed her eyes. Cortez was standing by the door. He had on a simple navy suit. It was likely the only one he owned. It was clean and pressed, but it wasn't expensive. He looked lean, but he stood tall. The moment it landed on him, his body went rigid, the color draining from his face. Cecilia smiled, small, unscripted, real. Please join me in expressing gratitude to our facilities manager and my son, Cortez Drummond. The room broke into applause. It was measured, knowing applause. Everyone in Charlotte had heard the story. The scandal had made its rounds. They knew what he had done, and now they were witnessing what came after. Cortez didn't step forward. He didn't dip his head in a bow. He didn't put on a smile. He simply looked across that packed room at his mother, his eyes carrying a lifetime of hurt and shame, and underneath it, something different. Gratitude. He gave one nod, short, respectful. Cecilia nodded in return. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an embrace. It was an acknowledgement, a beginning. Later, after the gala had wound down and the last donor had gone home, and the staff moved quietly through the rooms collecting glasses, Cecilia and I drifted out to the balcony, that same balcony. The night air was cold again, but this time we were both there side by side looking out at the old oak tree. I had asked Cortez to hang the Christmas lights on it, the same plain white lights Cecilia had been staring at 2 years ago. We stood together for a long stretch, not speaking, sipping brandy. The noise of the city felt far removed. Tonight was extraordinary, Cecilia, I said, keeping my voice low. You brought in over $500,000 in a single evening. She offered a smile this time, a true one. We brought it in Ezekiel, The Apex Fund matching grant carried its weight too. Still, I said what you've built here is genuine. You're changing people's lives. So are you, she replied. She looked at me. Your Uncle Floyd, he would be proud of you. You didn't let the money eat you alive. It nearly did, I admitted. It nearly swallowed everything. I stopped gathering myself. My eyes went to Cortez below, visible through the balcony railing, helping the catering crew carry things out to their truck. Doing his job. What you did in there, I said, recognizing him like that, in front of that whole room that took something. Cecilia watched him from above her expression, soft in the glow of the lights. He earned it. He hasn't missed a single day. He hasn't offered a single excuse. He hasn't come to either of us asking for anything. No, he hasn't, I agreed. I looked at my wife, the woman I had deceived for 45 years, the woman who had discovered in herself a strength neither of us knew was there. Do you forgive him, Cecilia? I asked. The question that had been suspended between us for a year. Can you? She didn't answer straight away. She kept her eyes on Cortez, who had bent down to pick up a scrap of litter that had blown across the lawn. Forgive, she said, as though turning the word over to examine it. That's a small word for something this large. I don't know Ezekiel. When I look at him now, I don't see the man who stood on this lawn screaming alongside Renee. I don't see the boy who betrayed everything we had. She exhaled slowly, breath clouding in the cold air. I just see a man who gets up every day and tries to be something better than what he was. He's holding himself to a standard I never imposed on him. He's answering to himself. How do you not respect that? She turned toward me. I spent a year in Africa, Ezekiel. I sat with women who had lost everything, husbands, children, homes, and watched them construct new lives out of nothing at all. Forgiveness isn't a lever you pull. It isn't a place you finally reach. It's a road, long and hard, and sometimes painful every step of the way. She looked back down at Cortez. I'm on that road, but he's doing so well, Ezekiel. He truly is, and he's doing it entirely on his own terms this time. I looked at my son down there stacking chairs in the cold, and I looked at this powerful, remarkable woman standing next to me, and I understood at last what Gerald had never grasped, what Renee could never have fathomed. I reached over and took her hand. It was steady and warm. No, I said. He's not out there alone. Cecilia looked at me, a question in her eyes. This time, I said, and tightened my grip on her hand. He has us, both of us genuinely. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she squeezed back. We stood on that balcony beneath the Christmas lights. Not the wealthy man nursing his secret, not the wounded wife left weeping, not the survivors of someone else's scheme. Just Ezekiel and Cecilia, partners. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, thank you, truly. This story sat with me for a long time after I first told it. What Ezekiel and Cecilia lost wasn't just a house or a son's loyalty or a marriage's peace. They lost 45 years of honest conversation. And what it cost them to get any of it back, the separation, the silence, the long, slow rebuild, that was not a small price. I believe God sometimes allows our secrets to be stripped away, not to destroy us, but to finally set us free. The pain was the doorway. That's what I keep coming back to. Here is what this story taught me, and what I hope it leaves with you. If you are carrying a secret to protect someone you love, ask yourself honestly whether you are protecting them or controlling them. There is a difference, and the people you love deserve to know it. Do not let your fear of who your children might become prevent you from teaching them who they need to be. Silence is not a shield. It is a gap that someone else will fill. When someone shows you genuine accountability, not words, not promises, but daily, unglamorous, unrewarded work, let yourself see it. That is how broken things begin to mend. And for every adult in this community who carries a family, revenge story of their own, whether you were the one who was wronged or the one still working to make it, right, know this. It is never too late. The women in that foundation proved it. Cecilia proved it. Cortez stacking chairs in the cold proved it. This is what I bring these stories to adults 50 plus for, because we have lived long enough to know that justice is rarely fast and that rebuilding takes longer than breaking ever did. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave me a comment and tell me what landed hardest. And if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories. I will be right here with the next one. Thank you for listening. Take good care of yourself, and I will talk to you soon.